Good evening. I'm Roy Pea. I direct the HR Institute, and we're pleased to introduce to you Tracey Wilen-Daugenti. And as you see here, she's VP and Managing Director of the Apollo Research Institute. She's been visiting with us this year as a visiting scholar. She is very well known for her books in higher education and women's research and technology. Published a good 8 titles.
Right.
I remember the titles. And was in charge of the higher education practice at Cisco, and is a very well-known leader in women technology and higher education. So very glad to have her with us today, giving us a glimpse into Society 3.0.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you very much for including me in your sessions here at MediaX. And I know that I'm being videotaped, so I'm going to try to stay within the box here, which is atypical. I've been on and off at Stanford as a visiting scholar since around 2002. I started looking at higher education and technology and the intersection and influence of technology on academia. And then I started to look at the convergence of work and education, and then saw there was a bigger trend, the influence of technology on society, work, and higher education. So I know that I was supposed to mention some of the research questions from our overarching institute. The Apollo Research Institute is actually only a year old. I started it for the Apollo group with the specific interest of researching specific areas in society, higher education, technology, and work. We started as the University of Phoenix Research Institute, and we just renamed ourselves to the Apollo Research Institute because we're taking on a much more global view and a technology basis in our research, which excites me very much. Some of the things that we look at is what are societal changes that impact work and higher education? What are some of the current and emerging technologies that impact work and higher education? Do societal complexities combined with the rapid adoption of technology create new work requirements in education and skills? And what are the future education and skill requirements? What are the implications of these changes on work, educators, policymakers, and the individual? And what about you? Okay. So we have our website, and what I'll do is the way that we work at the Apollo Research Institute is we try to mainstream scholarship. We develop our research reports in those thick, dense, black and white that you know, and then we try to mainstream them and do an executive brief, which is just 2 pages and colorful so that people actually want to pick them up, read them, and then come and read more of the dense materials. I created 3 research clusters just to give you visibility inside the Institute. We are virtual, so we attract researchers from anywhere in the US and some actually overseas. The first, the mission is the importance of value of education. The first research cluster is productivity and economic growth. The second one is skills and education, and the third one is future foresight. In productivity and economic growth, we look at the ROI of education to the individual, the firm, a sector, and a metropolitan area right now in the US on a national level. In skills and education, we look at what are the skills, emerging skills and education requirements, particularly in the business and enterprise world. And in future foresight, we look at what is the future, skills, work, careers that are required. We actually have partnerships, and I'll mention that because one is in the room. In each cluster, we have primary research who actually work in the Institute and contribute their time in research, but we also feel that there are experts that we need to partner with. We partner with the Futures Institute on our future foresight. We partner with the Milken Institute on our economic studies in the metro area, and we partner with Burson Associates on talent management and HR issues. So let's look at, to try to bring this all into a simple presentation is tough to do. So I will sprinkle in studies that are ongoing. We've already completed 20. We have 20 more in the works. And we'll try to bring in sound bites from each of the studies to illustrate the points. So let's just look at a couple of societal trends. I looked at the US Census, right, that came out this year. Picked out a couple that are really that I thought was worth noting to you. Number one, extreme longevity, or the fact that we're living longer. In fact, one of our researchers is putting into their research study a question. If you were to live to 100, which is becoming more and more the reality, does that change your perspective on life in any way, such as your career, your life balance, and your goals? And what's interesting is most people respond and say, I have to work longer. If I'm going to live to 100 or support myself to 100, I got to work longer. And I got to figure that out. So number two is I better stay healthy so that I can actually continue to be productive. And number three is I better keep myself educated and skill ready so that I can either continue to participate in the corporate world or I can break out and do my own thing. So interesting enough, the age is getting even sub-segmented into the young old, the old, and the old. So now you are marketing segments. Okay, another change that I thought was important to talk about is the new family models. That traditional Leave It to Beaver type of model, which my generation understood quite well, to parents, to kids, to dogs and cats, is now really changed into having many types of family gyrations or orchestrations, so to speak. In fact, in one of our studies on working learners, we're looking at the psychosocial emotional issues of learners and how that impacts when you have different family dynamics. For example, you are the first-time college entrant in your family. For example, you have a family that doesn't support you going to college and you're breaking the mold. So we look at all of these issues. And that study actually was done with 1,300 other colleges and mostly community colleges and state schools looking at this issue. And it took a year long, and we'll be releasing the results later this year. So, new models, changes. We see the impact on work. We see different kinds of teleworking, family balance programs, dry cleaning, healthcare systems, as well as teleworking. We also see changes in the education model. We see more options for people. They can either go from home, or they can go to school at work, or they can take a hybrid model, or they can take an online model. Society remix. According to the census, 1 in 6 now are Hispanic, 1 in 20 Asian, this is in the US, 1 in 8 African American, 1 in 7 marriages mixed, and 1 in 2 is white. So by 2024, less than 50% of the population will be white. What are the implications? Well, one of it is that the fastest growing population actually has the lowest levels of education. So there are implications in the work environment with training. There's implications in the education environment, in the types of programs or what people are coming in and need to learn. There's also implications on who's retiring. The most educated population is actually the one that's most rapidly retiring. So as we work with the firms, we have a lot of discussions around succession planning and replacement and how are we going to fill these gaps that are being created. This is actually fairly well documented in one of the schools in the Apollo network called the University of Phoenix. They actually publish each year an academic annual report to show the demographic profiles that are changing in their population each year.
Are they pretty much aligned with that data?
Are
they aligned with that previous data?
The annual report?
Yes.
Well, they don't track by birth rate. They track by populations who are attending the college. So we'd have to pull out together the annual reports and look at it. I really didn't map the school to the demographic profile. Women are a force of change. There's so many statistics being published today, but women, 58.6% are in the labor force, 51.5% in management, professional, and positions. Women are the fastest high growth in new businesses. Women are becoming educated more rapidly. I think the percentages are somewhere between 59 and 61% of higher education participants are women. 24% of women are pursuing master's and doctoral degree, and so the data goes on and on. We've had the most women CEOs in this year. Point well taken is women are creating a force of change both in the corporate world, in small businesses, in society, and something worth noting for both work and education. Mobility. I tracked this shift in the US from the census, which is one that people actually wouldn't normally think of, but mobility, which is the movement from state to state or city to city, has gone down in the US by 5-fold from the last census. So what does that mean? Well, when we talk to local, state and local mayors and representatives, they say, well, really what that means is that people are usually moving for either jobs, family, or housing. But because the housing and jobs has been depressed, many people didn't move. Now, this might be a temporary change, or this might be a longer-term change. But what it means to us is that people are now looking for jobs in the local metro area as opposed to in other areas. Number two is they're looking for education providers in the local area rather than in other areas, and we need to be responsive. Yes, sir?
You say the first thing you said, that they're looking, before you talk about looking for education, what was that first thing you said?
Jobs.
They're looking for jobs locally as opposed to...
In other areas.
What does that mean? Other areas?
Okay, so if mobility is down, right, the 3 reasons why people move is they move for jobs, they move for family reasons, or they move for, for housing, right? But those 2 areas are depressed, so they're staying local. So when we talk to mayors, we say, what does that mean to you in your local area? And they said, well, people who typically may have moved somewhere else aren't. So they're looking for what jobs are available for me in this area, right? So for example, if you are in the Silicon Valley, what are the jobs, what are available to you, and what are the education and skill requirements for these jobs in your local area? What types of degrees, what type of proficiencies and skills do you need compared to Orlando, which has a whole different industry base? So this is why we said this is a really important shift for us to look at, and we're doing 2 things to address it. First, we're partnering with different metro areas to do 16 skills assessment at the local area to say, okay, let's look at your local area and figure out what are the jobs and skills requirements in your industry, in your area, so that we can help answer these questions. Number 2 is we partnered with the Milken Institute to say on a national level, can we look at degrees, skills, and productivity and economic factors in an area? So for example, if I have a BA degree in Silicon Valley, what is that worth to the local area? Now, if I take that BA and move to Orlando, what does that mean there? If I'm working with San Antonio and healthcare is the predominant industry, or in Dallas, what type of degrees and skills are specifically required for that area? Or if I really want to be a Silicon Valley and I am not in Silicon Valley and I want my city to look and feel like a Silicon Valley, what do I need to do? Can you give me a deep look?
So the thing that's happening in North Dakota, the energy sector, is just kind of an anomaly, not a trend.
I'm sorry?
The thing that's happening in North Dakota with the energy sector, huge oil shale, they have like 0.5% unemployment. They don't have enough housing for people. A lot of people are going there. There's no housing, so that is an aberration, not a trend.
Well, again, I'm referring to the census and what they're giving as a national trend. We can certainly look deeper and see about this one area, local region. I don't think that area is on our list, but I can check to see if we're doing either a regional study there or a metro study there.
Is telecommuting playing any factor in mobility?
So let's move in. Thank you. Right. So telecommuting has increased, but I'm just for this part of it just looking at the societal factors, right? Because it gets very integrated. Okay. So let's move into the technology, right? So there's 5 changes, and we can go through the whole census book together to look at the implications. So now let's look at some of the technologies. Now, typically, I'm not with a very technology-oriented group, so the concept of actually understanding technology is difficult. So I use a technique that I use because I've taught for 15 years working learners as a working adult, and we had one thing in common: we were both very tired. And so what I used to do before YouTube, this is how old and dated I am, is I would go out and try to pull snippets of multimedia and try to pull it together for my students so that they could understand a concept, a video lecture basically. And they responded very well to it and said, let's do more video and less Tracey, right? So I'll take that and show you 5 technologies that are emerging, and then we can discuss how they pull it together. One is the growth of the internet. We know that's pervasive. What's interesting to watch over time is what is being used on the internet, whether it's online video or social technologies. So let's look at the first area, multimedia. I create these videos, so there's lots of flaws.
Hello, my name is Lady Gaga.
We have become a multidimensional society. Flatboats have been replaced with engaging and immersive technologies. Virtual reality replaces the real world with a simulated one. Augmented virtual reality is virtual reality augmented with sound, video, graphics, or GPS data. This creates a new and engaging view of reality. 3D are objects that are created on 3 planes and provide more depth than a 2-dimensional experience. A current trend is a 3D projection mapping on buildings. Video artists are matching video to the building using 3D effects to make it look like the buildings are crumbling, changing structure, and even more. This engaging multimedia experience renews the way that advertisers communicate and reach broad audiences. Imagine a world where 3D billboards and TVs create a real-life presence and experience in your home or in your neighborhood. Today, billboards can watch you and you can interact with them. 4D, such as the Ralph Lauren fashion show, is 3D with enhanced simulations such as wind and water mist flowing over a live audience. Our research indicates that society needs new skills such as new media literacy. This is the ability to critically evaluate and apply new content such as multimedia in applications. Okay, so as you can see, there's just a smattering of different kinds of multimedia that I pushed together to help explain the concept. So many people say that Avatar was the tipping point where Americans demanded that everything in society become 3-dimensional. Many students explain to me that now when they go out for jobs in advertising, they're asked to bring multimedia portfolios, unlike in the past where you had storyboards. CNN, as you've probably seen, uses holography in their newscasting, and e-paper is on the brink of replacing newspapers and perhaps tablets in the future. And YouTube has become an incredible communication tool, not only in the society, but also for work and also in education. So multimedia is one of the technologies that we look at, as well as mobile devices. The white circle is actually showing how many cell phones were at that time. And now the variety of smart devices. So let's take a look at, again, mobile in an animated multimedia way. We live in a mobile world. There are 100 million telecommuters, increasing at the rate of 400%. 80% of small businesses rely on mobility. Mobile devices outnumber PCs 5 to 1. and have become a preferred choice for many people to transact and communicate. It's like having people in your pocket. 70% of the world's population have a mobile phone. That's over 5.3 billion mobile subscribers. In the US, that's about 9 in 10 people. Children are more likely to own a mobile phone than a book and expect to use mobile devices as part of the learning process. We spend around 3 hours a day socializing using our mobile devices. In the future, you can expect mobile devices to have enhanced features such as flexibility, personalization, holographs, touchscreen controllers, increased speed, and precision.
When I'm driving free, the world's my home. When I'm mobile.
So mobility, yes, it's telecommuters, and it's at a rise of 400% per year. Small businesses are creating their businesses without the infrastructure of building and mortar. If you look at some of the just headlines in 1 week that I was picking up preparing for my visit today, is firms such as wealth managements are using multiple apps. Educators such as University of Phoenix has an app. I'm sure Stanford has apps as well. Every day you'll see that smartphones, tablets, and mobile phones are in the paper and continually being integrated into people's lives. In fact, the iPhone didn't really exist. When you think about it, 3.5, 4 years ago, the iPad came out in 2010. The holiday shoppers this year are projected to purchase many apps. In fact, more apps than in Walmart and Best Buy combined, creating a happy Christmas, I guess. So mobility is a key influencing technology that had such rapid adoption. Social technologies. The bar on the left is Facebook, the quick adoption and pervasive use of Facebook with over 800 million users and 130 friends each. We see that impacting society, work, and higher education. So let's take a look at some of the social technologies. The virtual choir is an example of social media. The first virtual choir was created in 2010, where 185 singers from 12 different countries recorded themselves singing Sleep and shared it with others. Facebook is a social networking site where users create and share news about themselves. Facebook has mobilized crowds to overthrow dictatorships, organize for a cause, and create a new level of awareness in society. Twitter is a real-time information social networking service. New Yorkers actually learned about the 2011 earthquake from tweets from Washington, D.C. residents faster than the national news. LinkedIn is a professional business social network. Many people and firms use LinkedIn to post job and career opportunities, as well as build a business network. Tumblr is a social network site where people can share anything from anywhere with ease. Social media has changed the world. It's allowed people to reconnect with old friends and create new ones. Social media is changing the face of education, work, and society. It's difficult to imagine a world today without these innovative technologies. So for those of you not familiar with the virtual choir, actually people recorded themselves singing the same song from their laptop and then sent it in, and then it was orchestrated into a virtual choir, which really gives you a whole new viewpoint on the possibilities, certainly in music. Facebook is significant when you think about over this summer. It really mobilized people in 3 countries to really voice their concerns about the political agenda of the people in power. You think about Twitter being able to communicate an earthquake from Washington, D.C. to New York before the news, and how fast communication these technologies enable. And you think about how even just in the paper this week is that most shoppers are turning to social media to be able to help them through. So both in society, work, and education, we see the use of Twitter and some of these social mediums in so many different ways that it's hard to even imagine that life had actually existed without them, but it actually did. Gaming is another emerging technology undergoing actually a lot of adoption. This is a little snippet about some of the growth of games. Can you imagine that a game like The Sims has relevance at work? IBM and other firms are experimenting with ways that simulation games can improve the work environment and customer engagement. World of Warcraft is a massively multiplayer online role-playing game that requires highly sophisticated levels of collaboration among tens of thousands of players in a single environment. Complex games such as MMORPGs can enhance leadership and team skills in addition to increasing work productivity and reducing boredom. A new gaming trend is gesture gaming, or controlling the game with natural movements. The potential for gesture-based computing is perfect for simulation, training, or learning something new. Juniper Research predicts that mobile game revenue will reach $11 billion annually by 2015. There are over 400 million apps available today, and the majority of them are mobile games. Games such as Bejeweled, Mafia Wars, and Angry Birds are highly addicting. Experts suggest that there is an untapped potential for games in mobile learning in society, work, and education. Farmville is a real-time farm simulation game that's been widely successful in the social networking website called Facebook. Here you can live your dream of being a farmer, achieve ribbons, and unlock new crops while keeping up with the neighbors. Games create the potential for new forms of learning in work and education through the ability to help people to connect, collaborate, create, immerse, compete, and engage in new ways. So some of the ways, and I know that Byron has done a lot of work on gaming in the corporate world, and some of the examples, McDonald's and Nintendo teaming up to train restaurant workers. We see Farmers Insurance piloting simulation training in their call center, then IBM using virtual worlds for sales training. We've also seen it emerge, of course, in the military use as well as in education. And my sense is that this will be one of the technologies to keep our eye on in the future. The last technology that I'll talk about today is robotics. Robots have been around, obviously, for a long time, but they're becoming more and more pervasive in society and use, as you can see from some of the growth numbers. Will robots replace people? This is Donna, a fully functional robotic woman who can cook meals, grocery shop, do chores, give massages, dress, and recharge herself automatically. She has an IQ of 130 and converse about news, travel, culture, and music. She can recognize and respond to visuals, voice, and touch. While trendy, more importantly, robots have meaningful uses such as helping people walk and save lives.
Paralysed for the past 20 years, ex-paratrooper Brady Kayoff enjoys a new sensation: walking.
For me, standing up and walking, I never even dreamt about it. I've been wounded for 20 years and I never dreamed I'd be able to walk.
The AnyBot is a mobile robot with telepresence. It can bring you anywhere in the world from your computer. A robot is a mechanical, intelligent agent that can perform tasks on its own.
We're now finding the U.S. military may have found the perfect way to test for chemical warfare. This is not a joke. Check it out. This is PetMan. It's the first robot to move like a real person. It walks and crawls, it does calisthenics, it even sweats.
The Bear robot lifts and rescues people in harm's way. It can do what we can't do: lift heavy loads, carry them long distances on a battlefield, in a mine shaft, near a toxic chemical spill, or in a building after an earthquake. The Bear can rescue those in need without risking additional human life. Drones are autonomous robots that can perform tasks without continuous human guidance. They are often used in the military and in space exploration, as well as cleaning floors and mowing lawns. Robots have come a long way and have many uses in work, society, and education. So those are some of the examples of robots being used both in society as well as in work, as well as in military and in medical. So obviously a lot of what we're seeing is also this rapid convergence. So if you see telepresence in a robotic device, you see the morphing of mobile devices with multimedia. And so this shift will continue to happen. So what I'll do with the work trends is I just picked out 2 industries where we've done some research and we work with a lot of employers to understand how this is coming together in healthcare and in manufacturing. But the first that we should talk about is this idea of lifelong employment and where it's going. So today the Bureau of Labor Statistics say that each person is really experiencing at least 10 jobs or careers. And so that shift is, how am I going to stay employed? What is my employment plan? And what are my education and skill requirements to continue? At the same time, we see an increase in micro work. So you see sites like Odesk or Ask.com where you can actually go out and get pieces of work done by an expert anywhere in the world, right? And so that adds a different kind of opportunity for a firm, but it also increases the competition of skilled labor and who you're competing with and at what cost. So these are factors to keep in mind. And the working learners, the Center for American Progress says there's about 60% of the workforce today are working learners, and the National Education Statistics say that about 73% of students today are not traditional, which is that they're moving from high school to a residential campus such as like a Stanford. But rather, people are now converging work and education together. So let's just take a look at a simple areas in healthcare. In February 2011, 1 in 10 jobs was in healthcare. 14 million people in the U.S. worked in healthcare. That's about 11% of all jobs in the U.S., and that's expected to grow. We hosted at my institute a panel of experts, all from the nursing industry, to discuss these trends. We had 8 experts from all industries. They were all nurses who used their degrees, skills, and education in a different way. Some were in policy, some were entrepreneurs in technology startups, some were chief nursing officers in business, some were in the not-for-profit sector. Basically, the discussion centered on the Institute of Medicine report, which stated that nursing industry and healthcare industry need to have higher levels of education, and they also have to have more technology proficiency. Why? Because it's linked to error ratios. If we can bring down the error ratios and mistakes by using more educated people and more technology, healthcare would be better suited. So let's just look, for example, some of the changes of how is technology integrating with healthcare. Well, simply, we know in the Bay Area, wireless sensors. You can pretty much monitor anything, anytime, and many people do. You have genetic devices, right? You can spit in a cup and you can find out disease paths for yourself and for your family. And things such as mobility integrated into something like sonograms. And there's so many uses in healthcare. Healthcare is always of interest to students because many right now are very interested in CSI and want to pursue healthcare in that industry for that. And I show them this video just to give them an idea of where it's going. So while they think they're going to be looking at dead bodies and cadavers, and I'm sure they would, it's also migrating into much more technology use, different uses of technology. So this is something called the virtual autopsy. I actually saw this at an augmented virtual reality conference and spent time with a surgeon there who was actively using augmented virtual reality in surgery. And they said to him, what are the benefits? Why would you use technology? And he said, Tracey, it's the difference between exact and precise. And if you want precise, you would use technology. And when you're dealing with a human life, you absolutely want precise. So this is just one of the samples of how we see technology integrating into healthcare. A second area, because all the male students somehow or another want to move into the car industry, the manufacturing industry, the car design industry. And what's amazing is the whole range of cars. It's been in the news a lot. From the $2,500 car to the Bugatti, which is designed by airplane engineers, to the robotic car by Google that has no driver, to the hybrid car, to the electric car. And so it's a very exciting area and certainly now has new competencies. Oops, so let me just move back before we do the competencies. So we aligned our institute with the Manufacturing Institute in Washington, D.C. They had done a study with Deloitte and found that skills and competencies of manufacturing today were different than yesterday, and they could not find enough people to fill these. So they developed a certification competency. They asked us to take a look and talk to and interview and study some of the firms that were trying to deploy or use the certification. And what we found is that, one, is certification is very hard to bring into the system, but two is it has to be embedded by the manufacturers, very much like a Cisco system did with the Cisco certification or Microsoft did with the Microsoft certification. So where we found that the certification was valuable, you had to really gold stamp it. When I talk to students who want to go into the car industry, I said, well, here's just an illustration where you might think that auto mechanic is very still like an auto mechanic, but quite frankly, that whole industry is also changing. If you take a look at this is a BMW auto mechanic working on cars using a multiple of technologies. Very different than repairing a car yesterday. This gentleman is wearing virtual reality goggles combined with voice activation and instructions so that he can see and hear and talk back to get instructions.
Release 2 screws.
So basically, every industry is being touched in some way by technology. And so we feel that, as we look at this with employers, we start to look and say, what are the skill requirements in many industries that will be required for people to continue to participate? And I'll stop that there. Education. First, let me just talk about the value of education. Most of the statistics that we look at are all around education and jobs. But we have to ground it and say education has a value to me. People with more education participate more, they vote more, they're more active in their communities, they volunteer more, they exercise more, they smoke less. I mean, there's so many benefits just around becoming educated. But we will look at some of the job growth. So these are some studies that I'm sure you're familiar that came out of Georgetown looking at education and skills in American jobs. One that I bring your attention to is just the green. In 1973, a high school degree was enough for many jobs. Today, in 2010, it's not enough for many jobs. And society has to somehow figure out if you've started, or the working learners expressed to us that if you've started in 73 and now you're looking for jobs, in 2010, but you stopped your education path then, you need to figure out what you need to do to become more relevant. Second is earnings by education level. I think this is pretty well documented. Third is, again, this is a Georgetown breakout of what education requirements are required by different industries, whether it's STEM, managerial, education, or healthcare, just as an example of a few. The green is our bachelor degrees, and then the light blue are master's degrees. What they did look at were skill gaps, and that's what my institute did, is we actually went out to 30,000 employers and employees and checked perceptions of do employees actually know what employers want in terms of education, skills, and competencies, and then vice versa. Are employers actually seeing and hiring and finding people that meet their criteria? And we found discrepancies in 3 key areas. Degrees. Employers said they wanted people with BAs and master's degrees. Employees thought they only wanted people with AA degrees or PhDs. We found in skills and competencies, such as things as independent workers. Employees think they're great independent workers. They can work virtually. Employers say, I can't find people who are independent and can work virtually. Employees felt they were great team workers. Employers said, no, I can't find any great team workers. So there's somehow a disconnect between what employers want and what employees think they want, and this is the area that we're diving into this year even closer with Burson and Associates and firms to say, where's the disconnect? Where's the disconnect happening? Are employers not really documenting fully what they need, or an employees not really grasping what is really truly needed? We also did a study on the military and found that military bring back key skills that are highly desirable for employers, such as working under pressure and teamwork and leadership skills. And those 3 skills the military seem to bring forward. Return on college investment. We've done 7 looks at correlating government databases, looking at 7 industries, the return on investment for the individual of a college education. Is it worth it? We have a lot of people at age 50 say, why bother? Should I bother going back to school? Does it have a value to me? And we found that yes, it does. All education has an ROI at different degrees, but certain degrees and skills and certifications offer more of an ROI, particularly in midlife, mid-career, such as healthcare and IT. And so we have those 7 looks. Finally, this shift from non-traditional student is now the traditional student, and that is one of the threads throughout the Apollo network of colleges is the use of technology and also the working learner. And this year we're hoping to be able to take a look at that even closer. Our working learner study will be out next year, but again, it only looked in the US and we collaborated with 100 other schools, but we're hopefully we can develop now something a little more broader. Student-Centric Learning. This was from my earlier time at Stanford, where I actually started a study and unfortunately could not finish it, where I was mapping the patterns of students on residential campuses compared to adults and adult learners. So for example, what patterns does a student take when they are trying to learn something? So for example, this is Ashley, and Ashley would go to her classroom lecture, but in chemistry class it was rather hard. So she would need to reach out to a virtual, with a teaching assistant, but she said it didn't really matter how she did it. She could do it virtually, in person, or a mobile device. Ashley, in the meantime, would go to Facebook to figure out if there was other students in the class with her, whether they're on campus or maybe in another school. And through that network, she would meet with, from other areas, find a chemistry club. And through that chemistry club, that virtual group, she found learning resources that made sense to her, whether it was the Purdue game, chemistry game, whether it was a telepresence with a Nobel laureate, or whether it was, finding some good RS feeds or different blogs that made sense to her. The point is her patterns were very similar to adults. And when you think about when you have 5 generations in the workforce, You all have different backgrounds of education and different preferences. So where I may grab a laptop and you might grab an iPhone and someone else might grab a yellow pad, we all will make choices on how we learn. So we found that, what I found is that the patterns were the same, but it's being able to provide the resources that the individual needed to help them get to their learning goal. So the future of you, we did with the Futures Institute, first a think tank or an expert workshop here in Palo Alto. We invited in experts both in technology, academia, corporate, in a variety of sectors to really talk through what is the future like. So many people want to know, tell me about the next 10 years. What am I supposed to be able to do so that I stay employed? So we looked at six major trends that were happening and then 10 key skills and competency. One obvious one, which I showed you this evening, was multimedia literacy. Having the ability to use and understand and create with multimedia in some fashion. Cognitive data load. Being able to sort data and being able to know what's useful or what's not useful. Virtual capabilities. Being able to drive together large virtual teams. So the important is that what today that's different if when we talk to employers, they say what's really important for the individual is that it's a package now. People really have to take control and have personal foresight to be able to direct their careers because the resources aren't here for them and they may not be getting it from other places. So they need to plan out their education, they need to plan out their work skills and experience as well as integrate technical literacy. Some people call it developing a personal brand and being able to market your brand. I think it's more important to say it's personal foresight, being able to really plan your future effectively. So I'm going to stop. I'm actually not going to play that last video because I know that we're probably well over our time. And I want to thank you very much for, I know it's a hard time and a hard time of the year and a hard hour to be here, but thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, I'd like to know what you are most puzzled about in the relation between technology and jobs.
So what am I most puzzled about? I would say outside of the Silicon Valley, there is not an urgency by employees or individuals to be technology literate, even though we see how rapid technology is being integrated into work environments. And if it's in the press every single day, my sense is that there needs to be more urgency around this issue. I also get concerned that I don't see it as prevalent in higher education as I had hoped. I see still, I've visited over 100 universities globally and still see lack of use of technology in a lot of it. So when you think about it as an employer, you get the results of the higher education, right? And I employ a lot of people, and when they show up on my doorstep, we almost have to retrain them. And I think that should be a little more integrated.
Well, can I push back a little on what you're saying?
You can push back on anything you want.
You know, the high-tech jobs are actually the easiest to export of any kind. And the payoff for getting a high-tech education is a mixed story. For example, the guy who's working on the BMW car is probably being paid about $40,000 or less to do that job. About half of what he would have expected 10 years ago from anything like that level of skill. So that we're in a very, very complex environment where the sort of the public view is if we can only educate everybody to high-skilled jobs, we'd cure the economy. But that seems to me like a real illusion. I mean, we probably need 25 million jobs in the U.S. And we're not going to create them with anything like this kind of technology. So I'm just saying, you know, need to ask deeper questions about where we're trying to go and how.
Yes, so I would agree with you. I don't necessarily agree with you on the technology. You might spend some time talking to Facebook and Twitter and ask them, and Salesforce.com, and ask them about their hiring and the lack of people available in STEM. However, I do agree with you on the point that we need to look at the metro level. And I think that was as a result of a lot of our studies last year, as we realized that it's not a national, it is a national issue, but you can't treat the nation the same. There are significant differences in metro areas, and employers increasingly want to have skilled people and educated people that match with what they are doing. So if it doesn't make sense to have a STEM background, to work in Disneyland or in some sort of hospitality field, that makes sense. But it may not make sense to have a hospitality background to work in a Facebook or an Intuit or a Cisco Systems, right? You might need to have a different set of skills. So I agree with you on that point. Chuck, I'll go with Chuck.
Well, you worked at Apple and at HP and at Cisco, if I recall.
Yes.
And I recall maybe 15 years ago there was some notion that 3/4 of all the higher education spending was actually done by companies retraining their own workforces. Do you know where that stands these days?
So, and that's a very interesting question on two levels. So the first level is, yes, I moved out from New York City for family reasons and ended up in Silicon Valley, and I'm very thankful for that. Apple was the place that I tried very hard to get into, and I couldn't get a job because I had no technology proficiency whatsoever. So I couldn't get a job, so I temped. And then I got into Apple, and they put me into quite interesting manufacturing because I had lower skill levels. And Apple pretty much said to me, you're not going to get promoted in this company unless you get an advanced degree and unless you get more technical. And so I went back to school at night, like many people in the Valley, getting an MBA. They said either MBA or Master of Engineering in it, and some sort of proficiency on our product line. And so they brought the faculty into the campus because they wanted the case studies to be about Apple. And I thought that was a very valuable program because it was a cohort and there was a lot of benefits of that. What we're seeing today is a lot of companies are not willing, they're willing to do tuition reimbursement, but that's about it. They're not willing to really take care or bring in specialized programs. They would like to see people come in and do exactly what I did, is take it on my time and my dime and be able to get up to speed. And basically it's because they have the pick of the crop, right? There's a lot of people who really want to work for Apples and Googles. Right? So you pretty much say, okay, if I'm going to live here and I'm going to stay here, this is what I have to do. Now, I was in advertising in New York. You didn't need an advanced degree. I mean, what I had and the skills were just fine for what I was doing in that industry. So again, it really does vary. Now, the University of Phoenix is only because of one of the network of colleges actually has partnerships with over 200 companies who come to them and say, I can't wait to retrain people. Please bring your faculty into our company and let's start to converge this whole education and work. So my first year there, I actually took a deep dive. So I really appreciate Chuck for bringing this up, because I said, what is this university? Who are these people, right? What is going on? And this is not a formal study, this is anecdotal. And I went out and I reached out and said, find me students, and I want to know what's triggering them to go to school. Is it a work issue? Is it a home issue? Is it a desire issue? And we went by industry, manufacturing, working learners, healthcare, PhD, doctoral programs, and we looked at it and we found a variety of interesting triggers of why people and what's going on across the broad brush US. So thank you very much for that question, because it's immediately the first thing I asked when I showed up at Apollo is, why are 450,000 students going to your school, and who are they and what's going on that we need to look at? And you know what? It was exactly what happened to me. Most of them had the same kick in the pants from their employer who said, you got to get skilled. And I can leave these there. Yes, sir.
Three questions. How many students do you now have in the school? what's the distribution between online students and classroom students, and what distinction do you need to make between education and learning?
So I run the Apollo Research Institute, and these are great questions for you to address directly to the president or the provost of any one of the 7 colleges in our network. I should have brought an academic annual report for you because 2 years ago I'd be able to spit out all these numbers for you, but right now I'm so removed into the research side that I just don't really track it.
Give me somebody to get in touch with.
I can't. In fact, the provost for the bulk of the years is Adam Honier, and he is a Stanford alum. And Adam just moved out of the provost role so that he could focus on the student experience and the technologies. So I think as a Stanford person, that would be the person I'd want to talk to, because he was in the provost role for well over 15 or 20 years. A really fantastic person, as you can imagine. The president is Bill Papicello. He's an alum of Brown, and then the current provost is Ellen Drimmer. I think part of the problem, which we identified the first year, is a lot of people couldn't touch and feel that university because they didn't do all the things that other universities were doing, like having websites and president out speaking, provost having talks, and that whole thing, that has changed, and I'm very happy. Trying to understand a student and what drives the students. So I'm just not the appropriate person anymore to answer those questions. Yes, sir.
The robotics and future role of robots, won't that replace a lot of low-skilled jobs?
So this is one of the areas that the Institute for the Future we were discussing about what types of skills will be replaced through both knowledge and mechanical by robotic automation, and at the same time what kind of new jobs and opportunities and skills will be required to build, run, operate, maneuver the robotics. So it's a fascinating area. I think Marina is actually coming out with a book on this area.
On that count, I have a visiting educational roboticist from South Korea, and they have passed a law that by 2015 it will be required in all preschool centers that there be an educational assistant robot to help teach English language to children.
Let me just ask a follow-up on that. I mean, if the Latino population is getting undereducated and they have the lowest skills, they will have the lowest skill sets, that will be a very large portion of the population. Won't that have a political and sociological effect if those low-skilled jobs go away?
Actually, they're the fastest growing college education at 24%. That's what they tracked this year. So I think the census is probably reflecting on a point of time of what the demographic profile is. But when you look at who's going to school and the rates, the Hispanic is the fastest growing rate.
Offline, I have some question about those numbers, but I don't have to waste time.
Okay. Yeah.
I have a question about the mix of jobs changing. They're saying in America the gap, whether it's the opportunity gap, the gap between the rich and the poor is getting bigger, which is leading to more social unrest, the occupy movement, whatever we want to call it. And what they're saying is that the reason for that is that the measure of civilization is always the middle class. They can carry the values forward. And so what is happening in America today is that the lower skilled jobs, they're there, and so some service industry, because you can't export them. The higher skilled jobs are there, but what is disappearing is the mid-level. So what used to be the heartland of America in manufacturing, those are the mid-level jobs, which may have been done through vocational training or whatever the chart you showed earlier. Is there any study that shows what are the kinds of jobs in the next 5 years that you would create to employ the mid-level or mid-skills? And indeed, if that's even true.
Yeah, so we particularly are not looking at jobs and job projections, but however, yes.
The skills associated with it.
Right, so we're looking at specifically the skills of here and now and what's required, and then the skills of the future. there are a lot of reports out there on the highest, mostly by the government, on the highest growing sectors and where the jobs are, and always healthcare comes up as, you know, top in IT. I mean, there's certainly, we can pull that. I mean,
those are high-skilled jobs. Really. Are they the equivalent of the manufacturing jobs?
I'm sorry?
The equivalent of the manufacturing industry, which used to employ a lot of people, whether for auto workers. So those are what I call the mid-skill level, vocational training. Those kind of jobs.
Yeah, I really can't respond to such a specialized question in a specialized sector. Yeah. Yeah.
You talk about the new style of learning, I guess, compared to the traditional learning. Have you seen in your research any university institutions that are what we consider traditional institutions to Stanford that are grasping this idea of the new way of learning? Or any programs or any examples that show what the future of an institution like Stanford might be?
Oh, sure. Well, so yes, so there's actually many mandates. I think even California's school system has a mandate to have a certain percent online. I think it's an understanding of what's online and what's new. So I can only speak from the network that I'm involved with at Apollo. They truly feel that you have to respond to the students. So what have they done over the years? And we'll just take University of Phoenix because it's the largest school. They responded to the student and said, I'm working. I mean, so the history of this, by the way, you probably don't know, is that the University of Phoenix, the Apollo group, was started by John Sperling. John Sperling is active today. He's 93. He's on the board. He's a very, very vibrant person. Cambridge educated, came back, worked at San Jose State. Many friends and family in the services, firemen, policemen, nurses, who were being denied an education because they couldn't make the hours. They worked in the hours when you're supposed to be in school. So he proposes to San Jose State that they start some sort of program for these kinds of students at night and weekend, and they said absolutely not. And so he went off and developed the University of Phoenix here in the Bay Area and eventually moved it to its headquarters campus in Phoenix. So we actually have a campus in San Francisco and one in Phoenix. But it didn't stop there because the students kept changing. And the students in the late 1990s, 2000s said online, this whole technology is starting. And I became aware of it because I joined Stanford for the first time in 2002. And the School of Ed at Stanford said to me, you got to meet a couple of schools while you're here. One is Tec de Monterrey, because in Mexico they're doing a lot of rural learning, online learning. Two is Open University in the UK, because they're doing very innovative with mailing things and online. And three, you got to go meet the University of Phoenix because they're just doing something very different there, and it's worth taking a look. So what I did is I taught a course there. And what it was in the year 2002 was really Web 2.0, threading and chats, all these things before they actually became mainstream in society. So I said, oh my goodness, there's something really unique happening here. So I went down to visit them. And then I came, and I really looked to see what is happening here. And they said, we listen to the student. We listen to the student. Whatever the student needs and figures to help them learn, that's the direction that we go. So they came into Cisco a few times, and I said, oh my God, they buy all this technology. What are they buying all this technology for? And they said, it's for our students. We listen to our students. So what did the students say? They said that we want social technology. They want a platform where they can converse in social technology. What else do they want? Adaptive learning. They want to be able to have custom learning, like the long tail. They want to be able to progress as an individual. They want video. They want to be able to rate their professors. They want to be able to connect with communities all over the world to create broad learning teams. They want to be able to connect with jobs in interactive ways so that they know how they can prepare themselves. So I would say I joined them. I actually pursued joining them because I said, you're the future. You actually are the future of education. Now, is it going to be adopted in all parts of the world? Certainly not. There's, campuses are different. Each are unique. They have their specialty area. So that's why I'm there. That's why I called them up and said, I'm ready to come over because I think you're doing something really special with technology that nobody else is doing. So long story short.